My name is Peter Winstanley. I retired from the Army Reserve in 1994 as a Lieutenant Colonel. I developed an intense interest in the story of the prisoners of war of the Japanese. And today I have the privilege of interviewing Robert Louis Miller, Bob Miller, who has a rather unique story in that he was a member of the Royal Australian Navy, serving with the Royal Navy when, at the fall of Singapore, he became a prisoner of war. At the time, he was the coxswain on a Royal Navy vessel operating from Singapore, and he was actually captured on Banka Island, or in the vicinity of Banka Island, and was incarcerated on Sumatra for the duration of the war. We've now crossed to Bob to hear his story. Bob, thank you very much indeed for permitting me to do this interview with you today. Maybe we could start at first by telling us where you were born, where you were educated, and how you came to join the Royal Australian Navy initially. Take it from then.
I was born in Broome Hill. My father was an Irishman that came out here in 1930 and was that he arrived. Married an Australian girl, and he had two sons. His first son died, was me and then my sister. From Broome Hill, I went into foster care with my auntie because of the death of my mother on the birth of my sister. After that, I was, at the age of 10, I went to Aquinas College, and I was there for 7 years as a boarder. Towards the end of, when I was nearly 17, I think it was after the Depression, or during the end of the Depression, he decided that I should get a job, and he arranged for me to become a cadet with an English company in England. And I went over to Sydney and I joined a ship. I think it was in an early 1933 I did 5 years at sea training on different ships. I first was in tankers, then we had to do cargo work, and the main thing in those days, you had to do 4 years, 8 months actual sea time before you could take a certificate to become a deck officer. Well, during the period I was at sea, my father died, leaving me an orphan with a sister only in Australia. And things were not good at sea at the time. Pay wasn't that good, although fortunately I sailed on ships where we had mostly Chinese crews, and we lived rather well. Well, I came back to Australia and gave the sea away altogether, and I was about 2 years, and a friend of my father's found me a job down in Albany, selling motor cars at his garage, which was, I think it was Holdens and Chevs, if I remember correctly. And was there was a young girl in the Taupas who eventually became my wife. Well, the war broke out around about 39, as I say. I was still in Albany and enjoying life generally as a landlubber, and I decided with a lot of them, there was a chemist friend of mine, a couple of bank boys, we thought we'd join up. Well, I thought I'd go into the Air Force rather than try at the sea again in the Navy, and I went and passed everything as for a navigator's job in the Royal Australian Air Force. And they said, well, you've got 9 months to wait before we send you anywhere for training. And I came back to Albany and I waited, and I thought, a friend of mine said, what about joining the Navy? He happened to be the manager of one of the big retail stores at Drew Robinson's. I said, right, we'll come up to Perth, and we joined the Navy at Fremantle at the time. Down South Fremantle was a barracks. While we were there, they sent us over to Melbourne for naval training, a couple of months, and we came back to Lewin. At Lewin, they decided, the Navy, that they wanted to take 4 people from each state to send them to England for training in officers' training. I was one of those selected because I had sea time. There was a member of Parliament's son was another one. The other one was Sir John Kerwin's son. And then was my friend who was, his father was a fisherman, and he had a lot of experience at sea fishing in Albany. Well, we made up the 4, and they put us all, 20 of us on, from the different states on the Ulysses. We proceeded to go to England. We lost 2 ships on the way over. I remember one had 8,000 tonne of beef for England, and they were hungry for food there. I don't know the other one, but that went down very quickly. We eventually got to Gourock, near Glasgow, where we were taken off the ship, and we were sent down to Portsmouth. At Portsmouth, we understood we had to do so many months at sea on different ships before we were allowed to go to the Officers' Training College in Brighton, or Hove near Brighton, called HMS King Alfred. Well, after months around there, during the period that we were in Portsmouth, where we used for everything from firefighting, incendiaries, because we're getting bombed frequently, nearly every night, and Portsmouth barracks were badly hit on many occasions. All the 2 or 3 story buildings, they were all leaking because of the roof. We lost a lot of men on bombs that had been dropped in the barrack area. Well, I then took a lot of leave up to an aunt in Glasgow. I even was up there during the period when the big blitz on the shipyards. And my auntie was a midwife, but she used to go in the ambulance with 2 or 3 medical students from the Glasgow Royal Infirmary, and they used to make up an ambulance crew, and they asked me if I'd come along, join them. And we went into the areas where they were badly bombed and helped out there for some time. Anyway, after I came back to Portsmouth, I got tired of being used for this, that and the other of flag parties and firefighting parties. I asked could I join submarines, but I understand the Australian government would not let us go into subs. So I thought of small craft, that's torpedo and gunboats, and they agreed. And they upgraded me from ordinary seaman through to acting leading seaman. It gave me a coxswain's job, and we went up to Fort William in Scotland, where we got a lot of training in all sorts of small craft on Loch Linney and Loch Iver. There. But while there, we were then posted down to Weymouth, where we had a little action in gunboats out of Weymouth. And from Weymouth, we heard that they wanted to make up 4 crews to go take over 4 craft in Singapore. Well, as I was getting no closer to the training in England, I'd been upgraded to coxswain. I thought if I go Singapore, I'm getting closer to home, and they gave me permission that I could finish my officer's training at Flinders. So 4 coxswains, and we made up 4 crews and with officers, and we joined the Empress of Bermuda, and without any trouble we got through to Singapore without only losing a couple of ships and convoys. In Singapore, it was a bit chaotic at the time. We were posted to the barracks, which was opposite up near Johor, across the Johor Straits, and we were only there for about 3 days when they evacuated the barracks, as for reasons we don't know, and we were posted down to and billeted down near Keppel Harbour so we could take over the new craft. Well, we were all allocated our craft, and we then had to provision the craft, and we had to go back to the naval barracks to get our provisions by truck, and obviously we got, and from then on we were duty to go up and down the coast picking up soldiers who were cut off at different places. Well, one of our experiences was that we happened to be in the harbour one day when the Empress of Asia came in with 2,000 troops, and she was badly bombed in the harbour. She was on fire and troops were jumping from 40 feet into the water, and we went up alongside and did 2 loads ashore. We picked up a lot of men out of the water and got quite a number saved. After that we had to go up Johor Straits one night to see what was going on there. There was 2 of us were detailed for this job. We managed to get out with only 1 injured, but full of craft was shot up rather badly. Well, we then came back into Singapore and we continued saving our troops what we could at night. They were stranded all the way up the coast of Malaya. And then it got down to the evacuation of Singapore. There was 2 ships in the harbour about 4 or 5 days before the fall, and we were asked to go down and help get the people on board. They were mainly young mothers with children whose husbands were in the Malayan army, and they hadn't seen them for weeks, and they came from KL, Penang, and all up north, rubber plantation, tea plantation owners, and we were helping these people get onto the different ships. Some of them were coming down with flash cars. The wharf was jammed tight, and we had to push most of the cars into the water to get parking area. Anyway, those ships got away, and I believe they all sailed safely through back to Australia. Once or twice we were loading the ships, we were thinking to ourselves of jumping on them and going home. Anyway, we stayed there, and our crews were still... I had a full English crew because I was only the coxswain, with 2 officers above me. Well, then they detailed us for the final evacuation to leave on the 13th, and it was a Friday.
Just 13th of February 42, is it?
Yes, February 42. Well, the 13th for a sailor is the worst time, particularly on a Friday, to sail, and I'd sailed once before when I was on the African coast in the merchant service, and we lost anything up to 10 or 12 men on 2 occasions with yellow fever and what have you. It's always stuck in my mind, never sail on the 13th. Anyway, we delayed and tried to delay the departure at night, but we left at 10 o'clock. We departed Singapore, We hadn't got far into the harbour, and we were in absolutely a blanket of black smoke from the burning oil refineries on Pulau Bukom and Pulau Sambal. And the next minute we'd rammed the stern of a naval tug and damaged the bow of our vessel somewhat for a bit of a leak to it. Well, then we proceeded on that night, and the next morning we came out into the Jurien Straits, and everything was peaceful about 8, 9, 10 o'clock, and a small plane went over. The next month there were planes in groups of 9, it was 3, 9, 27 I think I saw, bombers. And the straits were full of shipping. There were the Yangtze gunboats. There was 2 of them I noticed. There was the St. Bruick, the tug. There was I think the Wynebroek was where the nurses were on. And there were lots of small craft and a lot of craft that have been taken out of Singapore, like fishing craft with people on. Well, the bombers got to work, and they bombed consistently for practically all day. And when I saw 2 of the Yangtze British boats sunk and turned over, they must have had anything up to 200 to 300 women and children on board each. And towards the afternoon, we decided that we'd give it away. They had missed us each time. And we made for the islands and camouflaged up. And we decided to put a boat out to go and get survivors from these gunboats that were sunk. Well, we poked our nose out, but they were coming down, machining down the people in the water, so we decided against that. While we were camouflaged up in the islands, one lad spotted a float with 4 injured sailors on board, and we put a boat down, brought them alongside, and we found they were off the HMS, trying to see, just double for a moment. It was the Scorpion. There were sailors off the Scorpion. They were just floating in the raft, and they'd just been left adrift. So we decided to find where Scorpion was. Was she'd taken to the islands and gone ashore? So I, with a couple of the able seamen, towed these boys. We weren't able to take the injured aboard because we had no facilities and we were fully laden with army personnel. We decided to take them back to Scorpion if she was still there. Anyway, we found Scorpion absolutely untouched, no one on board, fully stored up and everything, and we sung out for the people. They said, oh, they're up in the bush, the crews. Well, they wouldn't come down, but we eventually had to abandon the 4 sailors, but we pulled their rafts up onto the beach, hoping that their mates would eventually come down and look after them. Well, after that...
You managed to get some bits and pieces off the Scorpion yourself, didn't you?
Yes, well, while on the Scorpion there, we went through and we found lovely silverware and all sorts of things that were quite valuable. We put into a bag because I don't know if we should have taken these things, but we brought them back to the ship. And then we were in the islands there for 3 days because we damaged ourselves coming in, and we had a damaged hull, which the engineers that were army boys on board assisted in fixing it up. We left there on the 18th, the islands, to head south to Banka, hoping to get through to Java. And on the 18th, it was a lovely day, we came out and there were the bombers again. Well, they weren't too worried about us, they let us carry on and we got fairly close. It was about 8 o'clock in the morning, we'd been going since about 6. And we saw a big cruiser in the distance. We had been told, or rumoured, that there would be a Dutch cruiser rendezvousing with anyone coming out of Singapore. We immediately thought it was, and we flashed her and waited, and then we saw a flash, but it was about an 8-inch shell coming towards us. Missed us, went over the top, and the next one came so close it damaged our bow, and we were leaking rather badly, and we're looking up and we found a destroyer also not far away coming from the north. The cruiser had put down a boat and they were coming through on a pinnace towards us, and they took over the craft and made us sail into Banka, which was only about a mile or two, and then we had to beach the thing, and then they told us to get off the craft. We had to jump off into the water, and then they took us ashore. The crew was short. I managed to get a panic bag, which I always kept packed, a little one, and some of the other ones. The soldiers were good because they had their haversacks full of rations and what have you. And they put us all into a big hall in Banka, and we laid there. There must have been hundreds of us in there, and at night they kept coming in and taking out the odd one, and then we heard the noise from outside. Obviously they were killing them, the boys outside each time. And I remember I was near the door and I wriggled up because somebody touched me on the toe, and I wriggled up into the middle of the mob. But the next day they got us all out, and we were then used for bringing stores ashore from the landing party in Banka. We did that for 2 or 3 days without food or anything, and we're getting hit with sticks or bamboos as they call them. And we survived that, and I think they decided they were going to take prisoners. Anyway, they put us into a school there for about a week, about 40 of us into each little schoolroom. We got rations and some water at least, and some food. I can't quite remember how we survived. We lost a lot through starvation and brutality at that stage. Excuse me. Can I have a drink too?
Now,
Very hard to recall what was going on. I do remember an airman being treated by some women nurses. It was on Banka where the nurses were shot in the water, and the boy that was with them, and I think he was with Sister Bullwingle, he got away, and he got a bullet through his ricocheted through his shoulder, and he was all right. And he was an English lad off the Prince of Wales. He was in camp with us and told us the story, what happened. And anyway, it was so many things go there. And then they decided to shift all of us over to Palembang. And they had these small coasters, metal steel coasters. They were around about 2,000 tonne, I suppose. And they packed hundreds of the boys into the holes, and they were in there for 2 days. Quite a few lost their lives in the holes before we got over to Palembang, because we had to go up the river, and then they discharged us at Palembang. In Palembang they put us into the Changhua school, if I remember, and they took the women down to a place. They were separately in other ships, down to a place called Bencoolen. They were wives, young girls, mixed race, nurses. They were all together. They were kept separate,
And there were children with them as well?
and children as well. And from there, and it's hard to remember, we were in the Chongwa for a while, and then they decided that we had to have a big camp for the Dutch, English and the Australians out of town, and we had to carve a section out of the jungle, and we were sent out on working parties from this place, and we built our own accommodation, which was bamboo, about 100 yards long, atap huts with bamboo benches both sides with split bamboo, and you laid shoulder to shoulder in these rows with earth floor, and no water, no sanitation. We organised that, and we were there working from there. After we'd finished our camp, we had to then go and work on the airfields. They wanted the airfield extended, and there were some big hills in the middle of it, but with thousands of Javanese that they brought over as labour, Chinese they brought from Hong Kong, and ourselves, we managed to lay out 2 or 3 good airfields, and without bulldozers or anything, just with a basket and a chunkle, like how you ran and through the dirt, and we did the job that way. The only water we got, we were very careful it was boiled, because we had a cholera outbreak, and we made sure, the Aussies did, that the water was boiled, and the sick boys that couldn't work, they used to bring it around to us. The rule in the camp was that we got a ration, I don't know, it was a very low ration of rice for every man that walked out the gate on a working party. And that meant that those that didn't go out were sick got nothing. So we had to share our food with.
Bob, I wondered if you might like to go into a little bit more detail about the level of rations that you survived on.
Well, the rations varied. We went as long as 8 days sometimes without real food, but we were able to get water, which was necessary. But the rations were very low. At one time we only got corn. They were like pebbles of stone. You could boil them and boil them in the 44-gallon drums. So we used to have to grind them between 2 stones and lick the stones to get some nutrition from them. Then the go-down was full of dried tapioca. Well, it's a grey stick when you dry tapioca, and that was boiled up into a grey porridge, which was dished out for us at times. They brought in some fish sometimes, like 3 or 4 kilos for about 800 men, and the food was cooked in 44-gallon drums, and we had big qualies, which they did cook the rice in, but that was very dirty. Well, as I did mention, the rice ration was only for those that went out of the camp. That meant we were on very light rations, because the more sick we had in the camp, the less food we got. And even if a man was dying, we made sure we took him out with us to get that extra ration. It got very desperate there towards the end. We stole what we could at any time if we were in working parties where we had to handle food of cans, stuff and that, and the Aussies were pretty good at that. We managed to survive, but none of us were much over 400 or 500 kilos. Well, that'd be about right. And it got worse. The life in the camp was disturbed a lot too, because if the Japs wandering around at night heard anyone who was dying and they started putting on a show and making noise, he'd have the whole camp come out in the dark, and he'd make us hold a line of us hold the rubber trees trunks above our head in a whole row for hours on end while they belted us with their belts. This beat 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, but we still had to work again at 7 o'clock.
And
This went on fairly frequently.
oh, now were these Japanese guards or
These the Korean and Japanese guards.
Yes.
Yeah, so they were quite brutal. You didn't know whether you were going to live from one day to the next, because you could come in the gate and forget to bow, and you'd get knocked flat on your face. I've seen a man jumped on, his back broken. It was good days and bad days, but we managed to get through. It was very little. Our work generally, we had a blacksmith shop that was with little portable forges, which we had to knock out cane knives and chungle heads and that sort of thing. And even for our surgeon, who was a corporal, we made him a saw for amputations. Ulcers were the problem, and when the leg showed bone only and all the flesh had gone and eaten away, gangrene had set in, Corporal Felton would endeavour to amputate, but they never lived.
What did he use? Did he have any anaesthetic?
No anaesthetic at all, and we used rubber from the tree, rubber trees and banana leaves in most cases.
Yes. Felton, you said, was his name?
Corporal
Was he in the Army or?
Royal Army Medical
Royal
Corps,
Army.
English.
Thank you.
No, things were bad. Well, I was there for 3 years, 7 months, and we were very lucky to survive that whole area.
Were there any officers in the camp?
There were anything up to about 400 officers, a very high rank, but they were completely separate. But we did have one officer that took over the camp right from the very beginning. He was called Commander Reed, Royal Navy. He was in charge of gunnery in Singapore before he was taken prisoner, and he ran the whole camp as a naval barracks, which was to our advantage. He split up the groups into messes, and he had complete control of the messes and the people, because he had regulating petty officers, and the NCOs all pulled with him, and we had no problem at all with our troops.
You mentioned earlier that you had some HMAS Perth fellows with you. Do you remember
Yes.
any by name?
Yes, I can. During one period, we had about 5 or 6 lads from the Perth arrived and thrown into camp. And one was Max Jagger, a young ordinary seaman. There was Ben Chaffee, leading seaman. Stan Roberts, leading seaman. Tag Wallace, TAG, tail air gunner, I think, off the Perth. Shorty Pascoe, Joey Hurst, able seaman off the Perth. I can't remember any more, but there were a couple extras.
And was there any variation to the work? You worked on the airfields. What other labour were you forced to perform for the Japanese?
Oh, we had to go down to the river occasionally when they brought in stores. And the worst time was working on the cement boats. They would bring in cement. And all the banks were broken. We were bare, and we were also perspiring just in a pair of shorts, and the powder, cement powder, burnt our backs badly. We got over that though. We'd had that job. One of the unusual things, when I go back to the medical setup, Corporal Felton, we had a disease or condition that caused a problem with us. Our scrotums went absolutely red and absolutely irritated, and they were exuding the yellow fluid.
Oh.
And he couldn't do anything. It was due to malnutrition, the problem. And one of the Dutchmen said, I think there is a artesian Boer not far from here who had lived there before. And Corporal Felton managed to get the Japs to go and get a couple of big drums of this stuff, this water, artesian water, and he rigged up split bamboos on cross sticks just the height of our scrotum, filled up the bamboo with the water. We all got astride and we were all sitting there splashing ourselves with this thing, and it worked.
If only it had a camera in those days.
Yeah, it wasn't very funny at the time. Oh God, it was painful.
What an incredible thing to discover something like that.
Yes, so we had that. The other thing was there was a bark on one of the trees which we used, very astringent. And when we got the bacillary dysentery and diarrhea, we ate that, and we ate charcoal by the mouthful all the time, and that usually got us over. But in the slit trenches that we had for latrines, we lost a few men there too. They just passed out. We got them out. And burial parties were done by the sick left in camp. They could hardly dig a hole, but they had to bury these poor devils.
And I suppose they were just a shallow grave.
Very shallow graves.
Something like that.
Because they were done by people who were incapable of working.
Did you have a chaplain?
Yes, we had a Roman Catholic one that had something to do with them, but wasn't a very influential person in the camp.
No. How did you find the Dutch prisoners of war?
Well, there was always the Dutch. There was always friction there. For some reason, the Dutch didn't like us, and we didn't like them very much. I remember we had a rather good experience. A plane came over one day, I think it was American, and dropped a bomb almost to the top end of our camp and blew a whopping big hole which filled up with water. And it was our water supply for bathing. Normally we'd have to stand out in the rain and catch the rain coming off the out-up roof if we had to wash ourselves down. Well, this pool we designated, and no one was to wash near it or go into it, but take the water from it. You know, the Dutch wouldn't play ball on this, and there was a tree up hanging near the pool, this hole full of water, and it had a big hornet's nest hanging in it. And one day the lads thought, we'll fix the Dutch. They were all up there doing everything that they shouldn't do, and he went up with a big stick with one of the lads, and he shot it right through this hornet's nest and took off. Well, there was Dutchmen flying all directions. We didn't have any problem after that. But no, we didn't get on very well. We had a very high-ranking Dutch officer who was of mixed breed from Java, naval officer, but he looked after his own mob.
Yeah. Did you think that there was anything to do with the fact that they had been the colonial power there and they were accustomed to having servants?
I admired their places because they were more advanced than they were in Singapore. The houses were nicer in Palembang and in Java. They were more advanced in schooling and universities in Java and all that than we were. They were great colonists, there was no doubt about it.
Yes. And is it appropriate now to move forward to around August 1945 when the conditions in your camp, the numbers, the deaths?
The deaths, we were averaging 2, 3 a day, 5 a day. Malnutrition. We were just worn out, full of malaria, and lack of food. We all had beriberi or happy feet. We all had skin like ringworms, and we were feeding bugs. Our barracks were full of bugs, and our clothing being a fandushi was all full of lice, which we used to squash them at as soon as we got an opportunity and clean them up. No, things were very grim.
Did you have a radio in your camp, or was there anything that
No, we did hear that somebody had a radio, but no.
Did you have any contact with the natives?
The Dutch had a man from the army who was a native of one of the islands there. Forget it, there's a Dutch island. And they were very loyal people, like the Gurkhas were to us, this chap was to the Dutch. And he was roaming the hills and getting a bit of information to the Dutch, which was trickled through to us occasionally. But we knew nothing of the outside at all.
Yes.
Right to the end, we thought, oh, that was another thing on. We were told that we'd lost the war and there was a truce. That was to stop the Japanese from attacking us, I think.
And where did that information come from?
It was fed from Singapore, I think. Because a lot of the camps, when they found they'd lost the war, they butchered the prisoners.
Yes.
And as a precaution, I got it in the book then, a truce was established.
Bob, you've now got your notes, which you scribble with great difficulty. I wonder if you might like to give us a few comments from them.
Yes, I was making notes from the 13th of, which was month would that be?
August.
Of August.
45.
Just scratchy notes. All I got on the 13th was men dying fast of starvation. And the 14th, the last of our working parties, the Japs decided not to send us out, and we thought there was something suspicious about it. And then we saw the Japs and the Kempito, which is one of the worst groups they had. They used to interrogate the prisoners with water treatment and what have you. They were having a great old party, and then 16, 17, 18, there was a complete lull in the camp. No working parties. We were worrying what was going on. We were still endeavouring to know what was happening in the place. Recce planes came over at one stage and the Japs opened fire. So we were starting to get depressed. The rice ration all of a sudden increased to 550 grams. That meant it would be 100 in the morning, 150 lunch, and 220 in the afternoon. That was the biggest ration we had since we've been prisoners. The Japs were still quiet about the truce, which we heard about. We understood that we'd lost the war, but it was a truce. Anyway, the official news of the truce had just come as a story. And we're celebrating there with extra food and what have you that we got. The Japs will bring it into the camp, and we then the Jap decided that the guards were staying in their camp, and we would be put our own police guards on, our fittest men, to look after the camp. And for what reason, I think some of our chaps were starting to play up. And then we started to get shorts, socks, blankets, and boots, fandushis, that is like an underwear, towels, soap, greens to eat, and meat, which we'd never seen, increased all of a sudden, and some type of soya cake came into the camp, which was most unusual. We were still working. They were going out on working parties still to the airport, and some of us were still in the blacksmith shop. There wasn't a shop, it was an open thing with portable forges. We were all feeling quite well. We were getting coffee and cooler jar with the sugar were issued, but we were starting to get very sick and bloated through overeating all of a sudden. The camp, they even killed pigs, and then we heard there was convoys coming through to help us out, and there was a couple of people killed in the town by Japs or by our men, I'm not sure. Gula Java, that's sugar and stuff was still coming in, rice, and our rations were 100 grams for rice for breakfast, 200 for dinner, and 250 for night with sauce. Well, the most we got was 250 a day in the past. Planes were seen over the place, and they came dropping in toothpaste, toothbrushes, which we didn't really want. And the officer in charge of our camp was called Takahashi. He also had a doctor there, but he had nothing to do with our troops at all. He was supposed to be watching our diets, but he wasn't doing much of a job about it. Takahashi seemed to be frightened of trouble because he said that we shouldn't walk around in fandushis, which is rather a brief piece of underwear, because we are a great military nation, and that we should be fully clothed and look better. A couple of guys were beaten up by some Argyle and Southern Highland lads. We're still working, and the liberators came through. But prior to that, Lady Mountbatten came in with a group, and also we had 2 wireless operators dropped in that contacted Southeast Asia Command and told them of our plight. Captain Corey, one of our camp officers, immediately took over the camp when he said when we noticed the Japs weren't greatly interested in us, and he got the officers to radio for medical and food for us. We were bartering our food and our clothing and stuff that we're getting over the fence for more food from the natives. This is taken roughly out of it. We got blankets. We heard news from Tokyo, the occupation of Padang, which is on the west coast. We're rather fed up with everything. The boys that were dropped by plane with the radios, they told us all a bit about home, and we also listened to the radio Sydney for news, and from Singapore. Japanese, Chinese, Malays were all very friendly. Prior to this, they were not friendly at any stage of the period we were there. Oh, I remember one time when we were marching through, bedraggled through the streets on working parties. We passed a plane with 2 men tied across it, and everyone came along and spat or stoned them. There were 2 British Air Force lads that had been shot down, and they were set up in the main street, tied to their plane. They eventually died there, I presume. Well, we were sick, no radios in the camp, but the Dutch commissions arrived, British commissions arrived, and I had a first European meal towards the end with a Malayan man who wanted me to, he had a reason for giving me a beautiful meal. He wanted me to get some of these small craft, naval craft, and give him some information where he could buy them, because we'd like some to use up around the islands. Which I said I'd send him half a dozen. And the Liberators came over. The first one came over, dropped 2 lots, and then crashed right down in front of us. I remember I was frying an egg in the backyard there, and I was just missed by one of these
Containers or...
containers that they dropped. Well, then we had a funeral, and we put on a proper funeral with they had chaps, officers and everything there. We gave these 9 boys that were killed a good real funeral there in the island.
Now, you're still on Sumatra. What was your route to return to Australia, and when were you able first to send a message home?
Well, yeah, then on the, it was the 18th or 18th, some Dakotas came in to take up out our injured and sick.
Now, isn't that the 18th of September? So it's nearly 5 weeks after the war's ended.
Yeah, it's 5 weeks.
Thank you.
5 weeks after the war. And they laid it up, but one of the pilots, from Wageham I think it was, he called out, "Any West Aussies there?" And they said, "Look, we can," and he took 7 of us. And there were some Perth boys and that, and he poked us got into the plane, and he flew us into Singapore. Well, when we got into Singapore, they put us into the Changi Hilton. Well, we called it the Hilton because it had a roof, a floor, a shower, a toilet. It had everything that we really wanted, and it had rusty iron beds, and with a bag on it, they were luxurious. Well, while we were there, we were told also by the nurses who were looking after us in the recovery unit that they couldn't get all the milk and stuff that they wanted for us because the lumbers were on strike in Fremantle, which to the prisoners of war was a bad thing to hear. Anyway, we were there for around about a week at the recovery unit. The recovery unit, I had to go up and eventually establish that I was still alive. They had no idea that I was in their books at all. So they kept telling me to go to the English Navy and they wouldn't have me. Eventually they accepted and found that yes, I was alive, and took down my name, and I had a boy, the name of Joe Hurst, with me off the Perth, and I said to Joe, "Oh, you're getting feeling a bit better. There's a jeep just outside the gate there. We'll take them and go straight down to Keppel Harbour. There must be a big ship in." And it was one of our big, I don't know, an English cruiser was down there. And we down in our shorts and shirt and shave. Of course, we had shaved heads all the period we were there. And the pinnace was coming ashore. And we spoke to the officer, telling them we were Navy, we were prisoners, and could we go out and have a bath and a feed or something on the ship. He said, "Hop on," and they took us out, and this was the ship that did the peace deal, apparently, when they organised the
Signing of it.
signing of it.
Oh.
And went down to the mess deck. I managed to get some naval uniform, clean shirts, and what have you. And they said, "What'd you like to eat?" And we want bread and butter.
Oh.
Well, we had bread and butter,
Oh.
and we could only eat one slice,
Yeah.
and we were full.
Yeah.
And yes, we tried to eat a whole slice of bread, another slice we just couldn't stomach. So they gave us some beer, and we took 3 sips, and that was enough. So they sent us back to the base in Singapore. Well, in Singapore, we then were put on the Highland Chieftain, the hospital ship.
Yeah.
And while on the Highland Chieftain, we were given intravenous injections and all the treatment for our skins because we had ringworm, we had ulcers and sores. My condition was I had beriberi badly. I had malaria, dengue fever, multiple disc degeneration, and general, but due to nutrition mainly.
Yep.
There was a bacillary dysentery and amoebic dysentery. We had everything, but as well as the ringworms and that all over our body. But they cleaned us up on the Chieftain, and I put on about 9, 10 or 12, 15 pound, I think it was, from there down to Sydney. When we got to Sydney, they put us into buses. And Sydney were waiting for us, apparently. And they were throwing oranges and frightening the hell out of us because we hadn't seen so many people and so many dressed up. And they sent us to one of the naval depots there, I forget the name of it. And they said, you can go and wait here till we send you home. Well, again, we used our own initiative. We took off from, I had friends of my relatives that told a friend of theirs that I was coming, and she met me in the naval base in Sydney. I didn't know who she was, but she wanted to send a message back that I was still alive. Oh, I must remember, on the way back on the Chieftain, we went into Darwin. And at Darwin, the newspaper lads came on board, took a lot of photos, and I sent a message then to my wife that I was alive. Oh, they sent a message I was alive, but they didn't say I was well, because we had a lot of wingies and stumpies on the ships of the Highland Chieftain. Well, in Sydney, Joey Hurst and myself said, well, we're not waiting around here for Navy or anything. We went into Sydney and we found that there was a crowd, English Air Force crowd were stationed in Pitt Street that flew with Constellations over to Perth daily. Well, we found the office, we got in bedraggled, and there was a squadron leader there, and they looked at us, and I thought he was going to throw us out, but we put the story through what we were, and we just arrived. We lived in Perth. He said, well, I've got some plane leaving at 4 in the morning. And I've got some waffles. He said, I'll put them off and put you on. He said, go home now. We said, what happened to that? Can we sleep on the floor here? So we slept on the floor in the office, and at 4 o'clock in the morning he took us out to the airport. And then they signalled. It was an 8-hour flight in those days.
Yeah.
And my wife was waiting because they'd contacted the Navy to send.
So did she come up from Albany, or was...
No, she was in the bank in Perth.
In Perth. Well, that is really some story, Bob. I'm very grateful to you for...
I don't know if it's that interesting.
I know you say that. I'm sure it will be. There are a couple of things I would like to ask you. Is Captain Corrie, was he, what nationality?
I would say he was British but Malayan, living in Malaya.
Probably one of the Federated Malay States.
He could have been colonial service, I don't know.
Yes. Were you ever beaten by the Japs yourself?
Yes. And Ernie Yateman, my mate, was caught stealing. He had a Fandushi full of rice one day, and they tied him to the bamboo like this of a guardhouse.
Yes.
I could see him too. He was there for 2 days and 2 nights in the sun.
Oh.
And they let him go after bashing him. Yes, I was beaten and burnt. But the cigarettes, they had a habit of burning you with the cigarette.
Yes. Yeah. Really. And were they... Who was the worst? Were the Koreans worse than the Japs?
The Koreans were more brutal.
Oh.
The Japs were brutal to their own people as well as us.
Yes.
But the Koreans, you risked your life with them, really.
Yes. Well, I think that just about covers it. Once again...
I hope it is of some use for someone.
Absolutely.